All right. Good morning. Let's see. So I actually think of myself as an accidental entrepreneur in many ways, because I didn't come out of college thinking of myself as going off and starting companies. I actually began in a large company environment, and in hindsight realized that I was actually doing very entrepreneurial things within a context of a large company. And so from that experience, and I gradually worked my way down to doing this succession of small startups, and now have a hard time imagining going back to a large company environment. But that experience has sort of caused me to develop a theory that entrepreneurship, there's a DNA to being entrepreneurial in the way you think about things, regardless of the setting that you're in. It's a way, it has to do a lot with asking the question why a lot. It has to do with always imagining and thinking that there could be a better way, not sort of accepting the status quo. So it's a mindset as much as anything, from my perspective. In terms of characteristics and personality traits, the Timex watch ad comes to mind. It sort of takes a beating and keeps on ticking, takes a licking and keeps on ticking. And I think persistence and determination, or sometimes it's often characterized as pig-headedness, is an important characteristic. It's also choosing a voluntary lifestyle of rejection, much in the way that sales jobs often are. So you have a great idea, you're very attached to it, you're passionate about it, and you have to have the thick skin to endure a lot of people saying, "Well, that really sucks. That's not really, can't see how that would work." People telling you you're wrong. But joking aside, I think kind of ultimately what it's about is striking that right balance between being passionate and being in love with an idea or a vision that you've created, and at the same time taking input and being open to influence. And those are very hard things to balance. I think one of the real kind of, the fatal flaw, if you will, of entrepreneurs is becoming so attached to their idea that they don't kind of see what the world around them is saying, and kind of going right into a wall sometimes, or just kind of not hearing. So at the same time, you have to, in the face of people saying this is impossible, you can't do it, the odds are against you, have that passion and conviction and determination to pursue. So there's a lot of it that is judgment and instinct that comes into play, which I would, another bias of mine, just based on my own personal experience, is beginning in an area that you have a particular insight or domain in gives you that leg up, and because you always have to assume, if you're pursuing an idea, that there are going to be at least a dozen other smart people in the world thinking of the same idea. So what's your advantage over them? And the domain expertise, at least in sort of my experience, has played a very important role in that. It gives you that unique insight as to what's flawed about this industry or this area. A lot of people have great ideas, and I think actually, not to denigrate that, but I think kind of having the great idea is actually not the hard part. Many of us can envision sort of a destination point. It's knowing what that journey looks like, the sequence of steps one must take to get to that destination point that is actually a very hard sort of, art and science. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. I'm Robert Simon. I went here to Stanford. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in industrial engineering. And then taking a class here at the business school, I think, which is still a popular class, which is you write the business plan class. With another classmate from here, we incorporated a software company called Teammaker in 1983. So I was there for the first 2.5 years, and then left to start my own software company, PS Publishing. That company was developing text and graphics applications for the Macintosh and Windows, and then it was subsequently acquired by Lotus Development in 1989. I ran their West Coast office for a couple of years. Then when they wanted to move us all back east, we graciously declined, and we started another software company called Virtual Corporation, which was doing software for the online spaces, online information, retrieval of information from the online services, CompuServe, MCI Mail, Dow Jones News Retrieval, and then the Internet. That company was acquired by Wall Street Access. Then went on to co-found a hardware company called Navitel, and then went to Sierra Ventures, and then while there incubated and then ran another company, which was a competitor to PayPal, called Bank, and that was acquired by Yahoo in 2000, subsequently called PayDirect. But I can give you some perspective from the entrepreneur side, and then we can later talk about the venture side. But to echo some of the comments that Julie made is you have to almost be schizophrenic. You have to have open-mindedness, yet focus. So that is really the crux of it. And you have to be persistent and on thick skin for sure. The folks that started Aldus, Paul Brainerd, met with 40 different venture capital firms before getting anyone to agree to invest in their company. So 40 times, no thanks, you're crazy, until somebody said, oh, maybe there's something here, and gave them some money. So you have to have conviction, and because it's an all-consuming thing, what you're doing. You're jumping off a cliff with you and your partner or your team, and you're saying, we have a solution, we've identified something that no one else has. So that's brash in the first degree. And then two, you have to believe that you can solve this problem. And you have to believe that you can solve it better than anybody else and sooner than anybody else. Because if you've identified it, then chances are somebody somewhere else is also sort of thinking about it. But it's a lot of fun. And it's all consuming. So.
Thank you. My background is I have an undergraduate degree in space mechanics and propulsion, and I love to say it doesn't take a rocket scientist to make beer or chocolate, but it doesn't hurt. I then went on and got an MBA and did the corporate thing. I worked for Xerox out of school, and then worked for IBM, another big blue. I had no desire to be an entrepreneur. I liked my jobs in the big companies, and I actually got into starting a company relatively kicking and screaming. I had a friend that was a VC, and he said, I see so many business plans, why don't the two of us start our own company? And I didn't want to start a company. I liked what I was doing. But I humored him when we sat down, and I think what got me really into this whole idea of starting companies was the process we went through. We never talked about what product or service we wanted to do. We talked what the goals of the company that we'd start, what the major goals would be. And we came up with three, and this is what got my juices flowing. And the first three were, whatever we did, product or service, had to be world-class, gold medal winning, top of the line, something you're proud of and passionate about. The second goal was, we want to get in on the ground floor of a new industry or a new segment of an industry. It's easy to say, but how do you find it? And third, the last goal was probably the most important, and that is, whatever we did, we had to have fun with it. Let's not take ourselves seriously. Treat the product or service with reverence, but everything else with irreverence. And once we got to those three fundamental objectives, I thought, damn, this would be really cool if we could achieve all three of these. And we continued the discussions, and we came up with some other key factors. One, I think, is very important for an entrepreneur, and that is you can't do it all yourself. And one of our key decisions up front was, with my partner and myself, do we want to own a large piece of a small company or a small piece of a large company? And it was a very strategic question. And we opted, let's go for a smaller piece of a bigger company. What that means is, let's get expertise in. Don't believe you can do it yourself. Bring the right people in, whether they're employees or consultants. Bring them in, pay them for it, and let's just ride the wave up. Don't let your ego get in the way. Either my partner or I could have run the company, but we realized time is money. Either one of us might have been able to learn the beer business, but it would take some time. So instead, we hired one of the best consumer goods headhunters in the country to find somebody from the beer business who was willing to come run the company day to day. Don't let your egos get in the way. Anyway, that's kind of the process we went through. What does it take to live this life? You have to be able to take the highs and the lows, the highest high and the lowest low, and be able to deal with it 3 times, 4 times a day. Raising money, even though you're trying to start we have a consumer goods business, both beer and now chocolate. I'd say my partner and I spent 80% of our time the first year raising money rather than building a business. You can't focus on what you have to focus on because you're trying to raise money. In our area of the world, there is no VC money. Matter of fact, we're finding that even private equity firms that do consumer goods don't do early stage anymore. They want to see $5 million in revenue before they even talk to you. So you're spending all your time trying to get money as best you can. One of the lowest lows, we had a deal for $3 million. The day before we closed it, the company that was going to do it decided not to do it. Kind of takes the wind out of your sails. Soon thereafter, we got Best New Product of the Year award from the industry. So you can go high to low very quickly, but you have to be able to deal with it. The employees we've hired have been great people. Not everybody is cut out to go through these highs and lows. It drives you nuts. So you have to be willing to have a thick skin, be able to be told no lots, but there are going to be good times too.
My background was a designer, kind of a potter before coming to business school here, and made my living as a very small business guy, selling my own work. I got out of business school and I worked for Williams-Sonoma for a few years, did a big startup funded by a large retail company in the UK for 3 years, and came back and worked for Nature Company and Smith & Hawken before starting Design Within Reach in '98. And it plays into something there where we're all different. I think that the entrepreneurship thing is probably a DNA trait and different characteristics here. But to me, that issue of in terms of success, going into some industry, where you actually do have some type of domain expertise and passion is really key. Or I certainly couldn't have done it without that, because the world is very competitive, and all throughout the fundraising, development of business, your credibility and your confidence is in many ways related to the intuitive way that you make decisions, and your knowledge of an industry, I think, is really key. I was lucky, it was in the State of the Union thing last night, sort of thinking, I think if someone's there wondering if they're an entrepreneur, it's probably not the right place to be. It's kind of like if someone said, I want to be a politician, but I'm not sure. You're either the kind of guy that can make compromises and do what politicians do, or you shouldn't be in that. You've probably been doing it since you were a young age, and I think of the entrepreneurial stuff kind of the same way. If you're really like taking risks and probably have some problems with authority and are more interested in your own solutions than other people's solutions, I think those are good traits. The issue brought up about being rejected, we were only rejected by 15 VC firms, not 40 like the other guys. But I think it's part of not just people saying no, but you have to be willing to be laughed at and feel comfortable with that. I mean, it's kind of an absurd dimension to it, but really not to take yourself too seriously and then take yourself completely seriously. But I think that issue of failure not being an option, failures are like a mathematical certainty in new products. That's just the way it is. And if you're an artist or a writer or something like that, you're so used to making mistakes all the time, it just comes with the turf. So you don't really view failures as personal rejection or failure. It's just part of the process. And the other one I'm thinking about, just kind of like a gambler analogy. They say that compulsive gamblers are people that get more euphoric experience from their winnings and tend to not worry about their losses. And people that don't gamble have the opposite. They feel so bad when they made a mistake that they can't imagine. I think that entrepreneurs are a little bit of that gambling profile where the buzz that you get from getting something right and really doing it really lifts you up there, and that way you can deal with all of rejection and other issues.
All right, thanks very much. So what we'd like to do is take about 20 minutes to open it up to questions. And as I reflect on the answers so far, they've focused quite a bit on personality issues, and maybe you also have a few more questions about skills. So just skills, developing the skills that are necessary. So we have about 15 minutes in this series before we move into the other side. Maybe,
I'd be curious to hear how important you think it is to have experience working in an industry, specifically working at a big company in an industry prior to starting something on your own. Obviously it's helpful, but do you think that it's necessary? And I guess this goes for all of you.
Well, it's interesting. I used to say that it was absolutely essential, and part of that was because the first few startups I did, I worked with people who'd never been in a larger company, and I was very arrogant and said, they don't know what they're doing. They're just learning it as they go along. This is so inefficient. It's frustrating, kind of figuring it out day to day. But I have softened in that stance, and my perspective now is that I don't think there is any part of what's so magical and kind of no one's really cracked the code on what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. You know, it can happen any number of ways. My own bias, and I would echo what Rob said, I don't know how I would have been able to do what I've done were I not doing it in an area where I have deep domain knowledge. Now that I've done it a few times, I now kind of abstract the skill set and say, you know, I might be able to move into another industry that I know less because I know kind of the framework for how to get a company going off the ground. But starting out, I don't know how I would have pulled that off. I think that the larger company experience, you know, I started at a Mondo company, Telco, Bell South, huge company. And you think, how can you be entrepreneurial from a 100,000 person company? I think it's important to go there. It's a great grounding to learn organizational stuff, management stuff, skills. You get access to the best training in the world, but don't stay too long. That's my perspective. You know, stay there long enough to get that good grounding so that you know how to work smart, not hard, and brute force your way through it. But get out of there before, you know, you become the organization man, as some people like to refer to it. So I think it does give an advantage, but I wouldn't say that if you don't have it, you know, you're not going to succeed.
I would separate the entrepreneurship, just continuing on that theme, separate the entrepreneurship from the domain knowledge. To start a new company, you have to have someone in the team has to have domain knowledge of the problem that needs to get solved. It may or may not be coincident with the founding team and the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is the guy that rallies everyone around and starts the stone soup. He's the one who says, okay, let's find much the same process that Pete went through with his group. Let's find an area, let's apply our business skills, our general organizational skills to solve it, and then let's find an area at which to apply it to.
Getting in the beer business is kind of funny in that I never drank beer till I was 29. I hated beer. I never drank until I met my wife. She drove me to drink, and I thank her every day. And my partner in the beer business has never had alcohol in his life. But part of our getting back to our objectives, finding a new segment that is on the rise and finding the craft beer segment was fortuitous. And we found that in looking around for company number 2, which is chocolate. Again, part of the criteria was getting in the ground floor of a high-growth segment. Really knew nothing about beer other than some home brewing. Really knew nothing about chocolate. But in finding a space that's rapidly growing, relatively rapidly growing, and bringing some unique ideas to that segment, you can grow a good business.
Unlike Pete, I've been drinking all my life. I can speak from my personal experience, having worked for 3 companies that were in the 100 million to 200 million, 15 to 20% growth businesses in my industry was absolutely key. And having made a bunch of entrepreneurial mistakes funded by a $5 billion company where I wasn't fundraising was really valuable. Again, that was both credibility issues, and also you know, if your objective is a significant business that may go public or something like that, to know what it feels like to be working in a more mature company that's operating really well, and to have kind of the industry contacts, and you may pull a board member or other people from that, was really imperative, I think, for me, in both credibility and just a confidence in where you're going, not just where you're beginning.
Excellent. In the back row, please.
Thanks. You mentioned competence, which then leads to my question about dealing with no's. And how do you deal with a crisis of confidence as a result of no? Can you describe one that you guys have faced and how you reacted and responded to it, how you supported somebody else, or how you dealt with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, and I can't say that I handle rejection well naturally, so it has been a developing kind of skill. I think the no is never easy, and it doesn't, for me, it doesn't just kind of roll off my back, but the most important thing I think the no does as a first step is kind of cause me to step back and say, why is this person saying no? And really kind of go deeper into it. It's and resisting that temptation to dismiss and say, well, you don't really understand because you don't know as much about this as I do. So really kind of, and then you know, sort of, I think moving into problem-solving mode around why are they saying no, sort of helps to move past the initial kind of dejected feeling of, we were sailing, boom. And then what happens, too, is, and I think someone touched on it, is that you can imagine what success looks like in the high, and that keeps you going. And so, the combination of that and really getting into problem solving and looking at it as part of a process, not the ultimate judgment of whether your idea is good or not, or that you're going to succeed or fail, but looking at it as sort of a step along the process and say, what can I learn from this? And then where's my course correction? And then sort of looking forward.
When, quick comment. When you're starting, and I'll speak to our experience, we're IT investors and life science investors. And then when you're doing a startup in that field, you come up with a thesis. You've identified a problem, and you're coming up with an argument why you have a solution for this problem. Number one, why there is a problem. Number two, why you have a solution to the problem. So you have to do a lot of homework on your own to convince yourself that you have something to offer here to address this pain point. So you have to come up with a lot of supporting data for yourself to convince yourself, and then others if you're going to go out and fundraise. Now, you are going to get some no's, but then you have to look beyond that and see if they are evaluating the same data that you are, see if they have the same assumptions about the data that you do. And if they come to different conclusions, then you have to include that in your analysis. Now, they may have different biases, they may have different assumptions about the market growth or the customer behavior, and then you can then, argue away or rationalize those, but you should take external feedback. Absolutely. And then you may, with the same data, you may come to different conclusions.
What we've found is that, again, don't let ego get in the way. You have to move quickly. The first speaker in the main auditorium talked about your first idea probably isn't going to work. You're going to have to tweak it. And if you go in realizing that, then being told no isn't a no. It's a learning experience. You don't just take it on its face value, but you learn. And what we've tried to do in both companies is to get a product and package to market, knowing that directionally, using the baseball analogy, you want to get at least a double. You're probably not going to get a home run, but if you can get a double at least, then you're in the right direction. And then listen, talk to your wholesalers, your distributors, your consumers, and find out what they like and don't like, and then go on a path to tweak it. And it might have to be major tweaks, but that's okay. Listen and hear, and if you're told no, learn from it and integrate it in.
The greatest bunch of no's that I remember getting, because when you're in business launching products and you're out with consumers, you get rejected most of the time. Most people don't buy your stuff. The small people do, and it's a no that you get all the time. But fundraising is a different thing, and to me, I had a long time to develop a business plan and to test it in front of a bunch of people, and developed a point where I'd heard all the no's, and I would approach a potential investor and sort of say, let me tell you the 10 reasons why this business might not work, just based on the input that I had. So you're less selling something than basically reacting to stuff that you've heard and then confidently going against it.
I would just add one more thing. I would say I've learned more from the no's than the successes. And I got to a point where I had a series of successes that I didn't think this was hard. It was like you just show up, things happen. The first time the no where the difficulty came was the first time I really sort of forced me to dig in and say, what's going on here? What's kind of the broader dynamics? I think you learn a lot more from the no's.
Okay, that's a great question for everybody. But of course, if you'd like to direct your question in a particular area, feel free to do so.
You've all talked about identifying a customer or market need, but I haven't really heard anything about passion for the product you're selling. And I'm wondering if you could talk about all the passion-based businesses that you know.
I'd love to, because I started the beer company in 1986 with my partner, and what I'd love to say is I haven't worked in 20 years. I've spent more hours doing it than you can shake a stick at, but it doesn't feel like work. I just jumped in, even though I'm late to beer drinking, and I've always loved chocolate, but the passion drives it. And when it doesn't feel like a job, it doesn't feel like work. And to me, passion is everything. But you also want to extend that passion not only to the individual, but everybody in the company. You want to make everybody passionate, feel like they're buying into it and really passionate about it, and extend that passion down to wholesale, retail, and consumer.
That's sort of the price of admission. So that's why we haven't really talked about it. It's assumed to be there. It has to be there because you're, we'll get into the lifestyle stuff. You're working, I don't know, pick your number, 12 to 14 hours a day. And when you're not working in the office, you're thinking about how you're going to make this thing successful. So it's a full-time job, 24 hours every day, every week.
Just one comment. I was probably working the same number of hours in the corporation. So the trade-off wasn't that great in terms of hours, but it didn't feel like work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a job, it's a lifestyle choice in many ways, right? So I think you hit it on the head. Passion is assumed. I mean, it is absolutely essential because one of the key things I didn't talk about, I think, around what does it take to be a successful entrepreneur, I think the ability to move people to your point of view is very important. And that passion is infectious. If you're passionate and you have a vision, something that's either value-driven or based on saying, we can do better than this, right? And a passion around that, then that's the galvanizing force. It's infectious to the people that you're trying to recruit to the company, even to investors, and sort of the whole circle that you want to touch.
And I think it operates kind of subliminally. It's kind of like, you can't be a business without a brand. It's your brand. Your employees kind of sense it. They pick it up in phone conversations, the investors. It's just kind of like, you could say it's the price of admission.
Yeah, you spoke about the entrepreneur not necessarily being the person with the domain. So let's say you are the entrepreneur, you know how to write business plans, you've taken corporate development jobs with big corporations, you smell the opportunity, but and you're passionate about many things. So where I'm having a problem is, what's an efficient way for an entrepreneur to come across both the idea and the domain? It's the intersection of these three things that needs to happen. And time is the most precious commodity. You can't spend the rest of your life looking at industries and spending 2 years in the search fund each time. What would be an efficient way for a person that has all of these entrepreneurial skills to come across qualified ideas and be able to find the content people to put those ideas? Because once that thing is there, the rest is a process.
One of the things that we did was, again, not to assume you know it all yourself. We actually exercised a great opportunity. We got a group of 4 students at the Anderson School at UCLA to help me quantify a potential business in the world of barbecue. It's another passion of mine. We had 3 graduate students here help us on the business plan for chocolate. What came out of these students helping was they got a lot of cool information on their own, but in looking for an opportunity that's going to be growing, it turns out the barbecue business didn't really show that business opportunity that we felt might be there. On the other hand, the world of chocolate, one of the interesting things the students came up with was if you look at different segments, whether it's beer or wine or chocolate or cookies or crackers or ice cream, one of the things that came out of it was in the world of premium, which is the world we're operating in, every business area had at least 20% of the overall revenue of that business in quote premium. In ice cream, it's 40%. With beer, with the craft beer movement, that went from 10% when we started to 20% today. But chocolate was only 11%. And we could see, even though it was smaller, it was growing. So if you have access to universities to have business students work on interesting projects, they can do some homework for you too.
Maybe another question. Back over there.
I had a question on one of the last things that the panel talked about was risk, and I'm with you on the stubborn and not accepting the status quo and passion and being persistent. The risk is the one that kind of gets me, and so I was kind of hoping that for the accidental entrepreneur Julie or Pete that you were kind of dragged into it to kind of talk about your perspective on risk at the beginning and if you had to overcome that, how you worked through that.
Well, I kept my day job. I kept my day job for a while, and the key moment was when my partner and I sat down after about 9 months in business, and we saw that the business had potential, but really wasn't growing because he had his day job and I had my day job. And that's when we decided one of us is going to have to do it full time, but we also jumped to the conclusion, rather than one of us, let's hire somebody from the outside to run it day to day. I came on another year later, being the outside person rather than the inside person. But we minimized risk by doing it part time until we got to the point where raise more money and bring the expertise in.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think it has more to do with the perception of risk than the actual risk, right? So if you can create a situation that allows you to perceive there's less risk, which means increasing your comfort zone. You know, I eased, I think, into it. My first startup was a company called Healthion, or Jim Clark, after starting Netscape, pulled a bunch of us out of SGI to start the company. And that felt, my perception of risk around that was lower, but rather than starting my own company kind of ground zero. And then gradually got into, you know, more and more flying solo. My last company I incubated at a VC firm where I was an entrepreneur in residence. So again, that feels like more of a safety net than in your garage. At this point, my husband's also a serial entrepreneur. We've been self-funding our own company, and that's been a complete bootstrap model. And so I think you can kind of ease your way into that and sort of think, what is it about this that makes me uncomfortable, and how can I increase that comfort level? Is it the fear of failure? Is it the lack of income? What is it? I also think it's great to do this when you're young because you have less at stake. The older I get, the more I know, and the more I have to, you know, sort of quote lose. You sort of get comfortable, you get soft, whatever. So I think it's easier to do this when you're younger as well.
My name is Shishir Mukherjee, professor in the Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Here we're sitting in a graduate school of business, and are we learning that it has to be in the DNA? You cannot train somebody to become an entrepreneur. In a way, I'm asking, well, what motivates an entrepreneur? Is it money, or is it desire to become rich? What is the difference between a non-profit and profit sector? So I think that's the question. Can you train?
Sure. Well, I'll take a crack at it. Well, it is always difficult to determine people's motivations. So some people think it's, you know, money, power, or fame, and I think you find each of those to some varying degree in entrepreneurs. Some people start a company because they do want to be rich. And a lot of companies were started that way in late 90s and 2000s with the anticipation of making a lot of money quickly. And they were rudely surprised when it, in fact, turned out to be much harder in the technology business to make money quickly and easily. Some people just want to start companies because they want to change. They're not happy with the way things are being done, and they want to change, or they come up with a solution to a particular problem. And that's the thing that's driving their passion. We've used the words entrepreneurship is in the DNA. That's being a little bit flip. But you have to have some character flaw in order to want to do take on this inordinate amount of risk and try to change other people's way of thinking and doing. So you have to have conviction and confidence in yourself and your ability to do that. And that's more out of the norm than in the general population. I certainly believe that you can ingrain some of the skills of entrepreneurship, absolutely. But you have to be a little bit predisposed towards it.
My question is, so let's say I'm juggling a few ideas onto to pick as to which I'm going to pursue finally. So how far guts and passion comes into play, and how far analytics come into play in choosing say 2 or 3 company ideas which I'm going on. Maybe one, I love it, I absolutely want to do it, but processing some information information and analytics, it might not be at that point the best to pursue, but I might have something which is kind of the other way. So what should be the right?
I would say if you look at something and say, wow, there's an opportunity here because of objectively assessing the market, but you're not passionate about it, that's a major, to me, that's a major warning sign. You know, it's like that's for somebody else to capitalize, but I would not pursue something I wasn't just deeply passionate about. And the converse is true. If you're passionate about something, you can't convince yourself analytically that there's a real opportunity here worth going. You can't imagine an equation that works from a business standpoint, then that's also a warning sign. So I'd say both are necessary.
I would agree. I get calls every day from people who want to start a beer business. Yeah. When we started our beer company, there may have been 10 microbrewers out there. Now there are 1,500. So it's a whole different perspective on what the business opportunity is. And you have to integrate the passion with the ability to really have a differentiatable product that has some growth potential.
Where are your pain points today? What are the biggest challenges or dramas that make your life difficult and you'd be willing to pay money to solve?
I'll tell you. I love food and drink, obviously, and so started two businesses in those areas. The climate at retail has changed over this 20-year period, and the ability to get on the shelf is harder and harder and harder. Why? From the distribution angle, there are fewer distributors. There's consolidation. Fewer distributors mean bigger portfolios, and how to get a startup attention within a distributor that has a big portfolio is very difficult. Retailers have fewer buyers. They represent more product areas, so there's very little time to talk to a buyer, and then just the time to get on the shelf. So the pain is, with a great idea, getting from initial acceptance from, let's say, a retailer to on the shelf. I'll give you an example. One chain that we got approved in, it took 15 months to go from approval to on the shelf. Everything just takes so long these days in this business.
There's this great book out there by a guy, GSP guy, called The Purple Cow. But it really deals with some of the same issues that he was talking about, that remarkable, I think really remarkable products or ideas are really in demand right now. And those that don't solve some fundamental problem, probably dealing with our lack of time and the oversaturation that we have with different options, to me are challenging. So I see different opportunities out there all the time, but I think that large one about really the specialized nature of what you're doing and having some extraordinary, remarkable characteristics are really key. Rather than something that we put enough money behind it, we're going to make the market aware of this, or relying on things that are based on cost efficiencies and economies of scale. For an entrepreneurial level, I think you have to have something that has far more kind of a real strong kind of character than that.
We've really begun already to talk about what it's like to be an entrepreneur in terms of lifestyle and the best and the worst, and also sort of when it is the right time. We've addressed that as well. But if you'd like to add a few comments that you may have prepared in advance on that topic of when is the right time, what is the lifestyle, and then we'll continue our questions. Is there anyone who would, or do you feel you've already addressed it in the questions? Maybe.
I'll follow up on some of the comments that Julie already made on when's the right time, and getting back to your question on risk. So I would separate the risk into sort of personal risk and then financial risk. And we've talked about ways to mitigating financial risk, which is, keep your day job. So on the financial side, you sort of look at it as one end of the spectrum. You have the luxury of personal assets or family assets or a spouse that's able to support you while you potentially don't have income for the next 12 to 18 months. The other end of the spectrum is you're unemployed, so your opportunity cost is zero. And if you look at going back maybe 15, 20 years, with the downsizing in Southern California of a lot of the military contractors, a lot of very talented engineers found themselves out of work, who were working on, at JPL or TRW, and there was a huge increase subsequently in entrepreneurship and new startups down there. So, the financial risk can be, one of two categories. On the personal risk, you just have to say, am I willing to put myself out there and risk a personal failure and ridicule for what I believe to be is a reasonable idea? And then you got to follow that up with compassion. If you're not totally committed to it, people that you work with or your potential investors will smell that. And they'll see, oh, Matt, he's giving it a shot, but, when things get tough, he's probably just going to cut and run, And it's going to be very difficult to build support, build a team around you if you're not totally committed.
I think getting some experience in the larger company environment is helpful. What it allowed me to do was to realize that I had to do something different because I was sort of bored stiff. And unlike Pete, I didn't keep a day job. Necessity forced me to sort of say, life is looking a little shorter here, and you really want to do something that you believe in. So I left the job and sold a house and gave myself 12 months to write a business plan and to thoroughly research a market. But I really didn't have any other option because I just needed it sort of personally and spiritually.
Okay. Continue questions, please.
Many of us living in the Valley are very familiar with, or at least somewhat familiar with, some of the travails of starting a technology company, but I'm starting to see it. This panel is diverse, and wanting to maybe get some insight into what are the differences in terms of funding or building a business that's not, I guess, traditional technology here in the Valley?
Well, I kind of mentioned part of it before. In consumer goods, there is no funding. There are no VCs. There are no private equity firms. So it's all personal and angel in making contacts. And one of the strategies we've had with the beer company and with the chocolate company is, okay, you can do your spreadsheets and figure out how much money you're going to need to raise, 1 million, 5 million, whatever the number is. But put that aside, and the strategy we took was, let's say we can only raise $500,000 or $750,000 or whatever the number is. Let's come up with a timeline and deliverables and say, if we raise $500,000, these are the things we're going to deliver, so we can show we can meet what we're delivering. And in the world of beer, we had 5 rounds of financing. We ran out of money that many times. We couldn't raise that much. Our first round was $20,000. Our second round was $50,000. But we always had deliverables to say we're going to meet what we say we're going to meet. And I think if you're not going to do tech with VCs, you got to really have to take the approach. You're never going to raise enough money initially. So do it step by step and show that you can do what you're going to say you're going to do.
I think that there are some second-tier or smaller firms that play in those fields that you can network into through angel investors and other people. That's certainly been our experience, but I think that they're probably out there. I know that they are.
My question is directed to Pete. When someone comes to you seeking funding, so what are some of the things they can do that would make you passionate about their idea also, and what are some of the things they may do in the presentation that totally fits you on?
Okay, so wearing the venture capital hat now, and how do we evaluate the passion of an entrepreneur? One of the things I like to see is if they've been moonlighting on this particular project for some period of time, if they aren't able to take the financial risk of quitting their job, if they've been working on it for the last more than 3 months, because that shows a level of understanding of the problem and maybe some interaction with customers. And maybe they've gone so far as to build a prototype. So those are all very positive and concrete steps. I would look for an articulation of the problem from the customer's perspective. You don't really know what you have in terms of product until you've got 3 or 4 customers, but you have to begin the process of talking to customers from the beginning. That's a lesson I learned, and we see it repeatedly on the venture side. One of the things that would be a red flag is sort of like, well, if we don't get this thing funded, we're going to try something else. The lack of conviction. Because I, as the investor, am counting on you to be the domain expert and to be the most knowledgeable about the problem. I'm never going to know as much as you do. So I am trusting you to do your homework. And that's, it's a kind of leap of faith on our side, too.
I was wondering if, we got Pete's idea in response to his question about if you have the expertise but you don't have the domain and the idea yet, for some of the other members of the panel.
Some of the things that we've seen successfully, and partially successfully, are the couplings between the business school students and School of Engineering. It's been successful here at Stanford and some of the other places. That often couples the business school student who has a passion for starting a business with initially a technical domain expert, maybe from the School of Engineering. Now, they have a technology. They don't know where to apply it. So until you get all three pieces together, you don't really have the ingredients for a potentially successful startup. So then together, the team of technologist and entrepreneur have to find the problem for which this is the ideal solution. That's often where things fall down. And that can take anywhere between 6 months to 18 months. Lots of times you have technologies searching for a problem, and until you find the problem, then you really don't know what we got. We have an investment in our portfolio in a nanotechnology company in Berkeley called Nanomics. And they've got, they're one of the leaders in carbon nanotubes. Okay, great. What do you do with carbon nanotubes? Well, we don't know exactly yet. The first application that they've got is a sensor, a very low-cost, highly sensitive sensor. You take these nanotubes, you take two here, you put one across, then you paint the one in the middle with some biomaterial that can tell if there is carbon dioxide or ammonia or something, and then it's an incredibly sensitive sensor that you can build at low cost. Or you can take these nanotubes and store hydrogen with them. The two hugely different applications in different applications, but you have to figure out what are the initial best avenues, highest potential.
Yeah, I'd say there's a world of difference between having a technology and having a product. World of difference. And, the two ways you come at it, and I think Pete did a good job of kind of talking about the intersection, is, the Silicon Valley is, I think, notorious for inventing technology without having really thought about where it's going to be applied. We came up with this thing, we think it's really cool, if we build it, they will come. So you can have that start with a technology, but then figuring out what problems are going to solve, how is it going to manifest as a product is going to be sort of the next sort of challenge and proof point you're faced with. The other way to come at it is identify a market pain point, a hole, connect to a customer base who might need this, what do they need it for, and then back into it and say how would we go about building that and figure out what technology to apply. But no matter where you start, you sort of have to get the intersection to do it. I think, again, I'm biased by my tech experience, but I think that what consumer companies do much better than technology companies do is get close to the customer. We're notoriously bad at sort of living in our own bubble, thinking how cool what we've done is, and not really talking to the customer. I think consumer companies do a much better job of that.
And I think on that, if you're at the center of the business, you're the entrepreneur there, you figure out what your shortcomings are and recruit for that on the other side. And it may be something that is resistance to understanding customers, or a weakness on my side, operations and logistics and some of that hardcore analysis. So I think you can offset whatever you have if you're analytic about it and support yourself with it in a different person.
Question for Bob. You mentioned that you used to work with big companies you like to do. Did you have prior startup experience? And if you didn't, do you feel like you needed it?
Yeah. But it wasn't just sick of big companies. I'm just not a meeting guy. when businesses get to a certain size and you spend a lot of time, I'm just too antsy. I like doing other things. I was very fortunate in having had a couple of different marketing positions and then doing a big startup funded by a very large company where I got general management experience 3 years out of business school and had an extraordinary failure over a 3-year period of time. And that was invaluable in both my confidence and comfortability with that stuff. So I was able to make some serious mistakes on somebody else's dollar. And I was very lucky.
A follow-up to that, which hasn't brought up, and this is sort of lifestyle. You have to think, when you start do your first startup, you have a lot of your personal emotion and being invested in it. Now, one thing that will help you with that a little bit is that realizing that this won't be the first and only time you do, or this won't be the only time you do this. Okay? So once you go down this path, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, you're most likely to do it again. That helps with a whole host of things. It helps with the rejection. It helps with I've got all my eggs in this one basket. It's got to be successful. Now, you have to be focused. You have to be compassionate. You have to give it all. But this isn't going to be, the life and death of you as a person. So you're going to do it again. The first time might work out, might not work out. The second time, you're going to be better at it. Third time, you're going to be better yet again. And it's an incremental improvement process. And then if you keep that in mind, then, world's not so tense.
I've been listening to this very eagerly. I'm a little older than most of you. And one of the interesting things is to see how evolved these people are as entrepreneurs. When I started my first company 40 years ago, anybody said no to me, they were just stupid. I didn't care about failure because you didn't exist. And you had passion for something you really wanted to do. I think what has occurred over the years, and many people are marvelous examples of, is that you do a lot more introspection. You sit yourself down before you get to business and say, well, what really do I want to do with my life? What gives me a lot of pleasure?
We only did that in preparation for the panel.
One other point I want to make, and I think you all agree with it, just because you start something doesn't mean you can run it. I'm a disaster at running a business. I'm in business now, I think it's in 80 countries throughout the world. If I had run it, it would be in the bankruptcy court about 4 years after I started. So think about really what you can do and what you're good at doing yourself. And you've got to have some humility. Because there are people who are saying this morning, if you can't run a damn thing, find somebody who can. And bask in your glory of having started a corporate company with your company.
I would even take that one step further and say, I don't think it's a matter of whether I can or cannot run a company. The question, I think Pete spoke to this a bit, it's, am I the best person on the planet that can run this company? Or is there somebody else who could run it better? Because time and money are your enemy. So do you want to go through the learning curve, the cycle, and put the business at risk as you learn that job? Or is there somebody who can come in and do it, faster, better?
Context to that point, and you talked about motivating others, exerting influence, and basically having the right people at the right time on board. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about what people, like how did you bring the people, how did you motivate them, and like what leadership skills did you find most successful?
Sure, I'll start. I think that's an excellent question because one of the key, if I were to attribute sort of success to one key thing, assuming you figured out that you're really an entrepreneur and all the stuff we've been talking about, is it's about the people at the end of the day. Most companies don't end up doing what they start out doing. They may do some variant of it, and they may do something completely different. It's a circuitous path to finding kind of your way to a repeatable model that's sustainable. So it's not about the idea necessarily. That's not the most important thing. The model can change if based on that. So it's not about that. It's really the constant is the people. And the first few people in a company, and I learned this lesson over and over again with each company, really set the tone and the culture of the company. I mean, the entrepreneur at the end of the day does it kind of to the greatest impact, but those first few people as a group, how they function as a group, really sets the tone for the company, and that has kind of a lasting impact. So what I'm learned to do more and more each time is be more and more thoughtful about what kind of people do I want in the company. I used to only think about it from a domain skill set standpoint, but what I really sort of realized is, are these the kind of people from a value system standpoint that have values that are consistent with what I want to create here and that will support sort of the mission. In terms of getting them on board, I think it really comes down to, again, that skill, and this is why you see a lot of folks who have successful entrepreneurs who are charismatic leaders, right? So the ability to move someone to your point of view and infect them with that passion that you have, tapping into something inside, because that's what's going to cause somebody to do things like take a pay cut or leave a secure job and take a risk. It's because there's something, an emotional appeal that you've tapped into. So I think that's very important. Having a real clear sense of, how are we going to change the world, make it a little bit, a better place, or, solve some really important problem. And that vision and that aspiration is, I think, a real key driver to getting those folks on board.
One of the people are everything. When we hired people, we weren't necessarily looking for a high level of skill in a small area of expertise. We were looking for motivated people who were willing to take on any and all challenges. Sure, they had to do the job they were hired to do, but we loved it and encouraged people to say, hey, nobody's looking at this thing, can I go look at it? And we say, absolutely. And you allow people to stretch, possibly fail, hopefully gain. But it motivates people internally to say, I'm not just pigeonholed into one area. I can go after a lot of different things. And one of our proudest things is two people we hired right out of college became VPs, just because they were so willing to take on new assignments. The other thing we did to motivate people was one of the niches we wanted to make in the beer world and now in the chocolate world is being the educators. When you do something premium, a lot of people are confused by what the heck all these things are. To become educators, we wanted everybody to feel comfortable that they knew what they were talking about, including receptionists. It's amazing how many people will call in and ask the receptionist a question about your product. Well, we want to show that we're experts, so every employee had to pass a beer test. And it's not just drinking, but we wanted to have people really get passionate about the product and know the product inside and out, so that's what we did.
Yes.
You know how conventional wisdom is that in a corporate environment you would have a mentor, okay, who mentors you through your career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're this entrepreneur, you're going out on your own, knowing what you know now. Would it have been important for you to have had someone who could have held your hand and helped you avoid some mistakes during the process of getting where you are now, or is it more invaluable that you failed at times and did it on your own to get to where you are?
I can speak to that your relationships that you're relying on all the time in periods of failure and needing feedback and all that stuff are part of the business. There may not be a specific mentor, but that deal of calling up and knocking on the doors and really being persistent of the most talented people in your industry and the people that you respect the most and using them for feedback all the time, I think, is absolutely essential. It's not a situation. If you think that you're in this thing alone and not getting advice of people that know a lot more than you, I think you'd be in a pretty difficult spot.
We used our board. We had a small board, 4 people, maybe 5 as we grew, and that was a great forum for bouncing ideas off of, getting a lot of strengths from other areas.
So in a startup where you've raised money, or even prior to raising money, you can have a board of directors or a board of advisors. Even in a corporation, you can identify someone as a mentor. But when you're just starting out on your own, you can also find and pick your own mentor. People are very willing to mentor, to help, to coach, to guide someone who's starting a company. And now you have a huge range of options, and you just pick someone who you think is an expert in the area that you want to go into or has some business experience, and you just glom yourself onto them. That's part of your job. Your charm, your passion, I'm starting in this crazy company in this new area. What do you think? And you get them through your infectious personality and optimism to spend an hour with you, an hour a week, an hour a month, or whatever it is. and they're now your mentor, one of your advisors.
Yeah, mentoring played a very important role in my sort of getting to be an entrepreneur. I had mentors when I was working in large companies who really encouraged me, and I never had a normal job. I kind of cleared the way and said, go do what you think needs to be done, and I think that encouraged me and helped me to tap into a lot of the skills that I think I needed to be an entrepreneur. And times when you say, I can't do that, or you're intimidated, they would be there to say, yes, you can, go do it. So that was essential for me, and some of those folks have continued to play a role as I've moved into starting companies as advisors that you go back to, and sort of when you're struggling with something or for validation and support. I think that's an important thing. I've seen entrepreneurs kind of do it solo, and I think that's very hard. It's hard enough as it is. That makes it so much harder. Building that support network of people that are going to advise you both professionally, emotionally, personally, on all those levels ends up being a very important reinforcement.
And I think that the really talented people out there that have had success, no one has a whole lot of time, but if you're really clear about, I know you don't have a lot of time, here are the quick things that I need to know, we can win over people by a respect for who they are, and they're very generous with the things that they actually know and they can help you with.
So we're all here because we're interested in entrepreneurship, but obviously if you choose that route, it involves sacrifices. Could you just talk a little bit about what sacrifices you think you made by choosing to go down the route that you did?
Not being able to have 20 hobbies. I inadvertently made a sacrifice around family and friends, and it doesn't happen in a dramatic way. It happens in a, kind of step at a time. Can't make it to this, can't make it to that way, and then one day you wake up and, you realize that, people are sort of moved on with their lives. So, and that's a regret that I had at a certain point in my career. And then I tried to take with my last company, I said, I'm going to take a life-balanced approach. I don't want to get into that point again. And I realized that's quite impractical because, again, time and money are your enemy. So, if you're taking this life-work balance sort of approach, at least if you're in a competitive industry, the other guys aren't. And it's taking you more money to get there. So I think it's very hard. I haven't cracked the code on it to not do this in a 24/7 intense way. And that means time and energy are zero sum. That means you don't have the time and energy to do other things. And I think that's I'd say a perennial struggle and a challenge of being an entrepreneur.
So there are lots of stories in the Valley about casualties on the personal relationship side, either deferred or you're in marriage and it just falls apart because one of the other partner is working 20 hours a day and just doesn't have time for either the family or the spouse. So it's a balance, and finding ways to incorporate your support structure into what you're doing while maintaining a balance. But it's absolutely an issue.
In the second company, my wife is our cocoa bean counter, so we get to spend time together at work.
To me, I use the analogy of having triplets. I don't have triplets, but you kind of know what it's like to have a kid, and then you have some friends that have twins or something. But for a fast growth kind of startup, like the third thing, it's sort of beyond what you could really kind of imagine, and all those things that deal with sleep deprivation and total obsession and all that stuff. And you really there's a 3 or 4 year period where you have to suspend judgment about what's going to happen, and that's where I sort of believe that I think this passion thing is key, because having a real interest in what you're doing gets you through those areas, and if you're standing back and wondering, it might be a little tougher.
So sometimes he's batting around some ideas. I'm wondering if I'm waiting for something unrealistic and a light bulb moment of, yes, there's enough to go on here. So I'm wondering, from your experience, was there ever a moment where you realized, oh my gosh, I have to run with this, or is it something that really just evolves and you have to kind of take a step forward without having that real assurance internally that you have enough to make your business work?
I would say, at least for me, has always been an aha moment, and it's just kind of when the different pieces click together, and you can imagine a way for this to sort of really be successful. But you don't stay there, right? It's transient, and then you wake up next day and you think, yeah, I'm an idiot. This is never going to work, and so you go back and forth. But there is I can remember distinctly the moment when I said, the idea occurred to me. I thought, okay, there could be something here, and that's a memorable moment.
I've had the same sort of experience. You're kicking around a couple different ideas. You're exploring one particular idea, and then at some point, it's enough to put you over the edge and then past the hurdle. And then you may waffle after that, but at some point you go, okay, this is strong enough to pull the team together and get going.
My metric on it, having tried a lot of different ideas and many methods, but the smart people in the industry, the really smart people don't return your phone calls. There's something there that happens when you're seeding an idea, and it's kind of like it's really gifted people kind of say, yeah, okay, that's corroboration.
Okay, we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
So you guys talking about the fact that when you start up your business, it's not going to be your own time. You're going to have multiple chances and so forth. If you started a business and if that fails, and if you have another brilliant idea and if you want to raise money, will you go to VC? Does it give you an edge to have started a company even though it failed, or is it a disadvantage?
I wouldn't say it's an edge, positive. We have some entrepreneurs that come into our office and they say, yeah, in 2000 we started this company, we raised $50 million, and then we raised another $50 million, we spent $100 million, and it's gone now. So that's not a positive. But you look beyond, and then you ask the questions, what was learned from that experience, both by you personally, what were the challenges that you faced, what were the incorrect assumptions, and if I don't think they make sense, or no one else around the table thinks they make sense, they say, this guy's a knucklehead, we're not going to go down this path again. But if it seems reasonable and it was a reasonable, no one's going to hold it against you for taking a reasonable bet. And then, you had an experience. It would have been nicer if it were a positive one, but fortunately, the attitude in the valley here is amazing, and it's not held against you in any way, really.
Yeah, I think there is a general. It was one of the wonderful things about the valley. I mean, I think there's a general feeling that, if you've had a failure, you've learned a lot. I mean, there's a positive attitude towards it. And that, how did that failure come about, and how much money did you burn along the way, and sort of all those things come into play, of course. But I think this is probably the industry, based on sort of my knowledge, I would say has one of the healthiest attitudes about failure.
I think we could do one that's very short.
Can the panel comment on service business versus product? As far as capitalism is concerned,
our firm invests in information technology and life science companies. So we're more product oriented. Some venture firms like service businesses, so the pluses and minuses. And then I'll consider software as a service, a product company. Okay, less so that, although it's a kind of a combination. So a service business to me are like, a telco operator or something like that. Often the characteristics of a service business are lower barriers to entry. It may be a regional play. And you are the purchaser of technology from the market, which is good because you get to pick the best technologies. The challenge for us as investors is we like to have that unfair competitive advantage that's defendable. And you don't often see that on the service side. But if you do, then those are great characteristics.
Okay, on that note, we're going to conclude. I would really like to thank the audience for a real variety of questions that were very thought-provoking. I would also like to thank Hannah, Paul, Turn for putting together a fantastic session here. And then finally, Julie, Robert, Pete, and Rob for providing answers that were really both illuminating with their experiences and providing real principles for the rest